Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. This is Eva Allan, and I've brought a couple buddies here together to talk about a very important topic, which is what entrepreneurs do wrong. And what we're not here to trash entrepreneurs. We love entrepreneurs. They're our friends. I'm a former entrepreneur, maybe future entrepreneur, who knows? And so we're here to talk about the general things we see that could be helpful to current entrepreneurs and those who want to be entrepreneurs, so that they don't copy the same mistakes that we've seen other people made or make or have made ourselves. All right, so who is on this podcast? Over to Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Faber. I'll just long story short, I am a dentist. Started my career in 2002. Started a practice in '05 from scratch. Kind of got a lot of experience doing all of that in terms of practice development. And I sold my practice in 2015 and been doing various things since then, including in angel investing. All kinds of investing, and have a degree in public health as well. And I've done a little teaching as well. So I'm sure along the way I'll chime in and say something else I've done. But until then, Johnny, go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, I'm happy to be here. Background is really focused a lot around the business innovation and startups, both as a startup founder myself, as well as someone who's worked on both the venture and private equity sides. Always happy to share all of the ways I did things wrong and wish I had someone to tell me how to do it right the first time. Excited to be here and looking forward to our discussion today. Eva?
Awesome. So opening the floor on a first topic within our queue, there's so many things we can say. So let's just pick one, right? Dan, which one do you want to start with first as a category or specific point?
I think one we've talked about before is taking cash too early, or taking prematurely started maybe trying to get venture capital or raising money from outside funders. I think that's kind of a thing I see a lot with entrepreneurs. They don't really necessarily have a full product yet. Sometimes they haven't proven even its concept or generated any revenue from it. And in the end, I think also that it hurts them as well, because they lose potentially more equity because they're going in too early. So something I do see a lot, and something I often pass on when I see companies like that.
Yeah, and I'll echo that too, Dan. One of the things I do see a lot as well is these companies that are great ideas have the good idea in hand, but unfortunately, they haven't really implemented the proper moat around it to protect their IP. So the lack of that protection does seem to bite them at the end, or also even in verifying if they are encroaching on someone else's IP that they need to unwind. So I do see a lot of challenges specifically around early stage founders who are starting to put the ideas together, but not vetting it to ensure that they do have the pattern of protection or the legal compliance and overhead to ensure that whatever they are building is going to be able to deploy and market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are good points on what I see. And people approach me for advisory many times, and what I see in the way they pitch themselves, even for advisory, not even investment, is talking about the problem, talking about how they solve the solution, but not talking enough differentiation about how they're different from others that are trying to approach that solution. Because when someone knows the industry and knows the different players, the first thing you have in your head is, okay, how is this different than X or Y? It feels like they didn't do their homework, or they're just saying the market's big, so I could do it too. Or what are we doing here? What is different about this business? Or is it explicitly not different because it's about distribution faster? Like, what is unique here, and have you done your homework? I think it's just really important for credibility.
Good point.
I completely agree with that too. I mean, one thing is that we do see, again, same experience you have, people come to me with ideas and looking for advisory support and help. First question I ask is, like, you're solving a problem in a very vast ecosystem. So who are you really focusing on? And the lack of definition on the target audience who they're trying to fix this for is one of the critical factors. But compounding that is sometimes they forget that the person they're solving for may not be the person who is going to be the buyer. So that buyer user dynamic is one aspect I think is really important for them to map and ascertain and determine how are they going to get the person to get traction, and also how are they going to get someone to pay for it.
Very good point. Another thing I see that we were kind of touching on was overvaluation. I feel like a lot of the time the way they figure out the value of their company is just working backwards from how much they want to keep to begin with. Or maybe someone told them, you want to keep this much equity, and so you have to work backwards. And this is basically, it's between how much equity do I want to keep and how much money do I need, and then you back into a valuation that typically is overvalued because there is no value to the company yet. So a lot of some of the companies I've invested in, which are easier to invest, are ones that have already have some traction, are up and running, and have numbers to go off of. It's a lot easier to obviously to value a company that has revenue, has a P&L, and has numbers to go off of, and you can compare it to others, obviously, compared to a startup with nothing going for it yet, other than the expertise of the founder, which is what you were hitting on, Eva, somebody with credibility. And ultimately, in that stage, you're really investing on the entrepreneur at that point, right? You really are investing just on the entrepreneur and not on the company at that point. From what I've seen.
And as a practical addition to that, discouraging people from raising when they need money or can't do it without money or need the help it kind of like irks me as a former entrepreneur, because there's a chicken and the egg where it might even create a wealth difference between founders that have savings and padding or family money and founders that don't and like need to feed their baby and whatnot. And so being an entrepreneur becomes a privilege that many can't attain, and that kind of reduces the potential ideas and businesses in the ecosystem, and then nobody wants to invest too early. So it starts a chain of unfortunate events, which either, okay, tough luck, it's America, or there needs to be a solution for, right? So what I see in the fundraisers as good ways to approach evaluation are a couple of the industry standard ones that the finance industry has, or a couple of creative ones. So one, what I've seen as successful, as the kind of vanilla ones, is comparables. What have other businesses similar to you in your space, in your phase, raised for? How far ahead were they than you? How far behind were they from you? And it's not like you can pull this from Bloomberg. You got to talk to them.
Right.
Or talk to their investors or something, have anecdotes. Like, this is kind of sleuthing a little bit to know. But you got to know something, some benchmarks. The second, yeah. Oh,
go ahead. I'm sorry. No,
just
please.
say them all and then you'll jump in.
No.
Then the second one is there are forecasts, but sometimes the forecasts are huge balloon type forecasts. They're not really practical. So it's like, what about a pilot 1 year forward forecast and a multiple upon that? Because this 5-year podcast to $100 million is just ridiculous. So what about a 1 year conservative forecast that shows a conservative approach? And then fundamentally, okay, if those numbers don't get somewhere reasonable, you're just choosing how much equity you want to give up, right? And when you want to raise. It's just an equation. There's just not a mystery, you know? So anyway, is that a helpful framework? What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I think that was really interesting. That was really interesting point you made about the privilege of somebody with money versus somebody without money. But the only thing I could say to that is it makes the first point about being worthy of investment in the first place. Like, are you somebody with credibility? Are you somebody who not only just has a great idea, but has the ability to bring it to fruition? Maybe you haven't proven that yet, but if you present in a way that seems like you're going to be that kind of person, and you have the intelligence and the know-how and the grit behind you, then I think it's I think you need that as much as the privilege. I mean, somebody with less credibility and all those things that I just mentioned and has money, they're probably going to still crash and burn, because they're going to put a bunch of money in and then just not be able to, they're not going to be to task. But I think that was a really interesting point. I never really thought about, but I think it kind of takes care of itself in a sense.
Yeah, and Dan, I can echo that too. One thing I thought that was really unique is that funding is not just from the traditional venture capital route. You can get capital and you can get support from other organizations, both public and private. I believe there's opportunities for people to explore potentially participating in something I do see more and more frequently, the VC studio model, where you are essentially getting the buy-in from other more experienced or more technologically advanced partnerships that are going to help kind of build and grow that as part of their belief in your ability as the founder to get through the hard parts and not just give up when it gets a bit of a challenge. So as you said, I think the founder mentality and ability for them to be someone that others can work with is really critical. And also his ability to out and sleuth and figure out, well, what else do I need to do to get capital? Do I need to get grants? Is there a way for me to get non-dilutive funding? Or is this an opportunity that would get enough interest from external parties that we can kind of shift into the early stage, potentially an angel network for fundraising and such?
I agree with that. I mean, I've been involved a little bit with Size City at Yale, and but just to speak to what Eva was saying, that's also a sort of a privilege thing, right? I mean, everybody involved in that system are either Yale grads or Yale involved or Yale adjacent, and that's obviously a somewhat of a privilege to be involved in that in the first place. But I agree, there are multiple places to look for money, and I think these days, with technology and the ability to explore all these things, that entrepreneurs can be pretty savvy in coming up with some money. I think that's an interesting point. Yeah.
And I think we beat this one to death, but one final comment is I feel like it has to be okay or become okay for people to say, I'm raising money now because I don't have the privilege or the savings to cash flow this. Like, it's awkward to say, but fundamentally, like, it's just like people, that's why they're raising. Like, why aren't we blunt enough to say that that it is a privilege? I don't have the privilege. Would you help? You know? What do you think about that?
I think there's an irony to it because um, the best type of founder to invest in is a repeat founder, right? Somebody, I mean, that's
Mhm.
the easiest one to do. And if they were successful, they probably have the money, yet they're still out raising money because they know they can and they know they're a good bet. So it's like it's kind of a catch-22 in a sense. It's like it's hard to break through because unless you just have that billion-dollar idea that and the IP to back it up, and you're just bringing it to the table. Otherwise, it's tough. Like I mean, I've come across companies that they're starting a gum or something, and they're developing it, and they're getting these awards and this traction and stuff like that, but they just don't. It's just like they're going sideways. You know what I mean? They get little bits of funding and they just don't get enough to kind of take off. But is that because they don't have the product to back it up? Is it that there's just not enough oomph behind it? There's not enough of a market? Like there's all these factors but in a sense, doesn't the market take care of itself in that sense? Like the best founders the cream's going to rise to the top regardless, is I guess what I'm kind of circling around.
Hold on, I gotta say it, and I'm interrupting you, Johnny, and I want you to, but like I'm exploding. What about founders that just got the shit kicked out of them, um, and have learned so much? They're second time founders, but they don't have the cash to redo it again. Are they, do you prefer a first time founder who hasn't done it yet, or a second time founder that has? And if so, why and when?
So happy to touch on that, Eva. So one thing I do like asking when I speak with founders is, have you ever had everything just go wrong? And the more resilient they are, the ability for them to explain that, yes, I've been in a place where it's crashing and burning, or I've come in and played the salvage team from the consulting perspective. I find that to be really helpful because they are able to then understand, how do you pull the pieces together when everything's on fire all at once? How do you find out that critical path to continue to keep the lights on and make the hard decisions without constantly second guessing yourself or being unable or unwilling to reach out to, if you do have outside capital, the people who are going to be the ones really mad at you when all the money goes away and you didn't tell them until it's too late. So it's really around the founders that are able to ask for help, to have a lack of, I would guess you could say, arrogance in terms of their decisions are being right, and really being able to have coachability, which I think is pretty critical, and find the right team for them to work with. One thing I think that's also important is we're talking about gain capital. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's really challenging, but for me, the most devastating outcome is not so much you didn't get the cash, it's that you got cash from someone who's now in your cap table. It's not a good fit for the company or a fit for you. And so now you've built essentially a legally binding toxic relationship with the person you're working with. And divorcing in startups is really hard. But I'm sure you've seen it before. We mentioned earlier around dead cap tables, but having a almost hostile environment is, I would say, the worst case scenario. And I've seen that kill a lot of really promising companies when you just have that founder misalignment with the funding, or the founder and co-founder having future misalignment as a team and company tries to grow. There might be some regime change that has to occur.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Johnny? Where do you see that? Do you see that with more like the founder not working out with the investor, or the investor being toxic? Like which is, I mean, obviously it's a two-way street, but where do you see that more, like from a toxic investor or the toxic founder?
I mean, it's a combination of both. I feel that, especially in the earlier stage companies, sometimes the people that are willing to put the time and effort to work with a founder first, second time as a co-founder, or someone who's able to put angel capital in or be that sponsor, sometimes their motivations or their expectations are slightly different. You do get some unique personalities in this business, which are always fun to come across. The question is, are those personalities that are ones that you can work with? And are they ones that are going to be okay for your company internally, but are other external people are going to say, oh, you're working with XYZ and reputation is not great. Maybe that's someone I don't want to get involved in because they have a history of doing this or that. So I think that earlier stage companies, especially as you start getting that first round of capital and the first round of co-founders and building the team out, are going to be the ones that are needing the most, I would say, legitimacy, and part of that understanding who their colleagues are going to be and how those colleagues are going to be seen by the industry as a whole. So definitely in terms of the initial founding team having conflicts, both with themselves internally as well as how others look at them, that's probably where I see the biggest challenge. VCs, they're typically, or even angels, they're typically more around, well, if I get my return, I'm happy. I can be okay with that. So I see that as a smaller conflict, and typically they'll self-select out of the process if they don't want to be in a syndicate of someone where they already have challenges with them.
What attributes do you see of a founder that comes, like, what's the most common negative you see of a founder that originally presented okay and then it turns into something else? Like, is it arrogance? Is it what attribute?
Yeah, I'll say if they're unable to keep a team in place because they drive them too hard or they don't know how to interact or engage with them, as one challenging factor. Second piece is if they have unrealistic expectations and they think that they always know how to do it right, that's sometimes a bit of a red flag that you don't discover till it's a bit too late. And then it's hard to walk that person through the right way to do it or get them feedback without them being upset or angry or thinking that you're being too hard or unfair on them.
I want to add one. The indirect answers to direct questions is a huge flag for me of whether I want to spend my time helping someone. Like, I speak English. My question was simple. And then like getting some really roundabout answer. Like, there's books on how to be a good listener. Just, repeat back the question. Oh, you're asking blah, 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 blah. Right? Yes. And answer that question. Like, yeah, just long-winded talkers I can't deal with.
I agree. I've run into that as an investor. I've run into that with an early founder, and some of them they're super. Sometimes when they're like, I mean, they could be very smart, but you ask them one question, they'll just give you like this laundry list long answer, and it was almost a yes or no kind of question. Yeah, and it's like, is that a sign of them, of how they're going to leave the company? They don't. It's like, can they see the big picture kind of thing sometimes?
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's interesting.
And the other piece too is them unable to deliver very basic operational information when you ask for it. So if I'm asking you for your list of components of your product, your list of vendors, list of clients, I'm expecting you to get that in about 2 to 3 hours max. 2-3 weeks later is probably not a good sign, because either you made it up or you don't know where all your files and your content is. Meaning, again, are you organized or are you just kind of winging this? And again, it's something that I do see as a bit of, if not a red flag, something that needs to be addressed, at least coached as the founder looks at how are they structuring and running their company. Are you doing this as mom and pop shop? Is this a lifestyle company? Or are you actually looking to scale and grow this at 10 million ARR? If it's the 10 million ARR company, you're going to have to start putting in some domain expertise and some institutional or enterprise style controls and processes in place. Mom pop shops aren't going to cut it.
Yeah, and that hits the kind of theme of formality before you raise, right? Like when professional companies or further along companies, before they approach investors, they have a deal room. They've got the client list, the current financials, the projections, everything's labeled, right? You're anticipating what the questions are, not creating it on the fly. And then also like one, that shows they've documented it. But secondly, that they haven't missed the rainy day stuff that's important. Like you talked about founder conflict, right? Okay, what is each founder's contract? Is it vesting shares? Do you know the splits? What is the authority and what's the board? That's really important for any investor, and it's just basic corporate governance that another founder can either help you with or a startup lawyer can help you with. And then so many law firms have these startup law programs. And so it's not, you can't afford a lawyer. It's just like go figure out what you can afford. And when and what's basic, what can you ask each other? So yes, formality on deal rooms, formality on contracts between founders. And then Johnny, I know you want to talk about regulatory formality and research.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really best practices to understand what's legal and what's not. And if you're having a product that's sitting in a gray zone, unfortunately, if you don't have the financial capital to navigate out of that, you're going to have a lot of risk exposure. And again, the question is, if this is a bit too risky, a bit too potentially not legal, you're going to have someone who's not really interested in going to go gamble at the casino. They're going to tell you no, they're not interested in coming to play with you. Because again, a lot of the times you're looking at taking capital and they're bets, of course. However, you're trying to do this with a bit of diligence, a bit of regulatory framework, as well as internal framework to ensure that I'm not just throwing money away at someone who has an okay idea, but it hasn't been vetted out, or they don't understand what is it going to take to get this from great concept to the FDA, or what that looks like in terms of if your clinical trial is delayed, if you have kickbacks, if you have some type of other issues when you put your paperwork together. What does it mean if this now takes 6 to 12 more months to make it actually sellable? And are you able to have the cash burn rate? Are you able to forecast out? Do you have your financial model showing you those different sensitivity analysis based scenarios to really say, if this goes wrong, I'm not going to need external capital? Or what is the inflection point where I can tell my investors, if we don't hit by this date, or this is our setback, our cash requirements, cash burn now will be X, Y, Z. So having that as part of that discipline as well as foresight really helps speak to the ability of the founder to navigate those kind of choppy waters and figure out what needs to be true for things to succeed. And if things go wrong, well, risk management is in place, so we're not done. We actually have a plan of action, and we have prepared for this already as oops, this is not great, but we already had that scenario built out and modeled, so it's not a surprise. I think having that is pretty critical. And again, I can't understate how challenging it is to get regulatory bodies to agree to your product being okay and safe. And so having a very, very conservative market access approach, as well as how do I bake in some extra runway in case things don't go well, either because the regulatory body was backlogged in terms of reviewing and processing your application, or them saying, this isn't ready for these reasons, these are our points of concern. You have to have that as part of your process, because there's nothing worse than saying, well, we missed our deadline. But it's great when you can tell me, oh, we actually had a deadline. We estimate it'll take 18 months. We did it in 12. Feels much better to say it that way. And there's nothing wrong with putting yourself in a position of, let's be very conservative in timelines. Let's try to beat those, of course, but let's not put ourselves underneath a very, very hard to explain why things went wrong sprint time. So that's my main, I guess you could say, please don't do this to yourself.
Yeah, definitely want to under promise, over deliver. And I mean, pretty much in anything you do, but definitely, and I've had startups where they're great ideas, and even an entrepreneur is pretty good, but I passed on them because they had completely unrealistic perspectives of FDA approval, of different types of regulation, of how long things would take, and also the idea of working capital, like you said, like keeping some extra cushion in there. They don't want to they think they're overshooting what they're asked, but they're actually underestimating what they need. And I think that's a problem I definitely see too often, but it happens. I actually had a question just based on structure, legal structure. What are you guys seeing as far as, or what's your perspective of the SAFE agreement versus just a straight up equity deal? Because I've been seeing a lot of these SAFE agreements coming up a lot more and more, and I'm just curious about your perspectives on that as well. Is there a wrong way? Is it something they do wrong? Is doing a SAFE a wrong way to go versus not doing a SAFE?
I think there are pros and cons of it where my jury is out. The doing a SAFE, there's a template on Y Combinator of a SAFE.
Yeah.
So your legal budget is
everybody
zero.
uses, yeah.
That everyone uses, right? And it has 3 variables. What is your discount to the next round?
Yep.
Does the SAFE have an interest rate on it? Because a SAFE is debt. So what if it never converts?
Correct.
And then what was it there? Oh, the cap, right? Is there a cap on the SAFE? A lot of people don't even understand what the cap on the SAFE is and the math there. So that's just a flag. But so it's easy for, especially for a seed or pre-seed round.
Right.
On the equity side, so some investors don't agree to SAFEs. They're too simple. They need more controls and more control, and equity allows for that, classes of equity, voting, etc., which SAFEs don't handle. So the complexity might be important per type of investor, and then you are haggling over the price, so you better be tight on your forecasts.
Yeah, and as part of that too, I like the SAFEs for most investors and most founders because, again, everyone knows what they are. Most companies and most legal firms know how to deal with them, and there's a lot of templates on Y Combinator or NVCA. One item that I do see as a bit of a red flag and concern is when they have a very messy cap table because they took a bunch of early capital from friends and family, and sometimes the way they solicited for that capital may not line up with what is actually allowable. So sometimes people are playing in areas where they shouldn't, taking capital from people that they don't really know who they're having money from. So you do see some type of risk and regulatory frameworks that potentially could come into play, even if it's not something that would get you in front of the jury and the judge. You don't want something that's going to have an investor say, I don't want to mess with this because I don't understand how you got your money and you can't explain it. And now this cap table looks a bit sketchy. So maybe I'll pass and go to someone who has slightly more traditional documentation or traditional sources and proof of where the funds came from and how those funds were legally earned, for example. I see this typically a lot of companies are on the fintech side where they do have a lot of, I guess you could say, I came out of stealth mode. I have a bunch of capital. I don't want to see who it came from. I don't want to describe how I got it. And yes, that's kind of the bread and butter, especially as like some of these crypto guys. However, that also makes me nervous saying, oh, I don't really know who else we're co-investing with, or if I'm going to be working with this company as a co-founder, how do I know that the funding we got is something that was, to be completely frank, clean money?
Do you find that where there's a lack of transparency and you just can't trust it? I mean, you see that quite often. That's interesting.
Yeah, and those are some unfortunate parts too, because sometimes people just like, well, I got money from friends and family. Like, great, but you need to document it. You need to show where that came from. You need to have at least paperwork that says you got this, and the person who gave it to you did it in a way that is not going to make me worried around you having to pay them back and whatever framework or promise that you gave them that doesn't align with traditional funding.
Mm-hmm. So what's the best thing to do? A, take fewer smaller angel checks. B, clean up that cap table in some way by creating some LLC that puts all these angel checks into one or something and having a lawyer figure out notionally how to do that. Like, what do they do if they already did that?
I mean, that's the first place is always don't put yourself in that situation. It's always the best way.
Yeah,
don't do this. But having reputable investors, reputable sources of cash, I think that's always a good start. But if you're in a situation where it's oops, too late, I wish I did this, I would say go to a legitimate legal firm, go to someone that might charge you money for it, but don't be cheap. Pay your lawyers and pay your financial people appropriately at market rate or better if you can afford it, because going for the cheapest option is just going to cause problems later. Because again, if you're not the expert in doing this, you should probably hire the expert. So don't go to the cheapest surgeon. Best way to put it. Or
I love that quote. I love that quote.
It's a good one.
Pay your lawyers. Dykema will really endorse this podcast.
Yeah, it matters. Having good lawyers matters. Not cheaping out on trying to use ChatGPT to be your lawyer is probably a good idea. And I'm sure that's happening more and more. I mean, I know lawyers who tell me their clients call and say, I just used ChatGPT, it said this, that, and the other thing, and they're like, well, yeah, but it didn't do this, that, and the other thing. So, I'm sure founders are doing that more and more now.
Yeah, and LPs too, again, is use your founder network, use the local groups that do founder meetups, talk to people and say, well, who are the lawyers that you guys all like and use? Who are the accountants? Who are the people that can give you the advice to understand that as an early stage company, you can't afford to pay for, one of the big four. Well, there are other boutique guys that work with that specifically, and they're willing to work with you at a price point that makes sense just because they like working with founders. It's a cool place to be. Building fun stuff is always interesting. It's just one of those areas that there are a lot of people with bad intentions, and you have to kind of navigate that, especially when they're working first-time founders. They know that things, and they know that there's things that you don't know. So they may take advantage of you as a result. So it's always better to have someone with a bit of reputation in the ecosystem that you can trust and go off of a warm introduction versus the first person you find on the phone book's Google search.
That is great advice.
Fabulous.
Fabulous.
I like that. Don't use the cheapest surgeon.
All right, let's make sure to hit at least one more major point. Where do you guys want to go? What direction?
I have one, if you know. I mean, and this one I see specifically with startups that are in the medical dental space, healthcare space, or it could be beyond that, but specifically because they kind of make decisions by committee, and when it's so early, they like the idea of getting an opinions of say they're making a clinical product, of getting a clinician's opinion, and they have a big advisory group. And I hear other people really recommending, have a big advisory group of doctors and dentists or whoever you're making your product for, and use that. And that's great and everything, except those doctors and dentists don't really have a perspective necessarily of the product economics and the business model. You do. That's your job as a founder. And they lean too much on, wow, this is the coolest thing ever, the doctors say, and they use that as a rationale and reasoning for making economic decisions without even that's pretty much what they do. And so it becomes an issue. And I try to stay away from companies that do that, because I do see them flounder sometimes when they use that information to really guide them. And it's sometimes they fall flat on their face. They don't see the forest for the trees, basically, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
I think that's always a really good point to see. And I think the other aspect too is, as you talk to your different KOLs or your subject matter experts that are going to give you advice and insight, the question is, would they pay for it themselves? Would they actually go use this? And I think having them answer that question would really help guide you in a way that is beyond just, oh, I like it, it looks cool. Well, would you pay for it? I don't know, maybe not. Having the person who's going to give you the right insight versus just wanting to come play startup founder or come play with startups is going to help you a lot more than the guy who's just going to say, oh, great idea, I love it, you'll be great. Versus someone who says, I paid for that, but only at this amount or this rate. And then that can really help you inform the unit economics that you're going to have to achieve, or even what your go-to-market and your biz dev plan is going to be as part of that.
Strangely, I think it's selective questioning. I think, like you said, it's asking the right questions, but they want them to say, it's like they want to ask questions they want the answers to, right? They want to hear, they're like asking the doctors because they want to know, is it cool and is it useful and does it fulfill that clinical purpose? But they don't want their advice from the economic perspective. They don't want to, you know what I mean? They want to take that information and be like, that's justification that this is a great product and it's going to sell, right? But you're right. They could easily just ask questions like, the more important question is, would you buy it? Do you like it enough to pay for it? Is it gonna? I joked around with Eva, I think once, where every dentist has a closet full of stuff that they bought that's just sitting there, $100,000 pieces of equipment just stacked in a closet somewhere. So it's something definitely to consider, I think.
Yeah, it's like their toy chest from their youth.
Yeah. And those are the ones that made it. And those are products that made it. But
the skeletons in their closet. I don't know, whatever we'd call it.
Sorta, yeah. It's their money sitting there in the closet, definitely.
Yeah, I'll add one more. It's asking the right questions, the open questions, and also to diverse stakeholders in the ecosystem, right? So you ask the doctors or the dentists are doctors in my book, whether they think it's cool, whether it's clinically useful, etc. That's what they specialize in. But then you gotta, if you're doing an employee benefits thing, you gotta ask the benefits brokers. You ask the insurance company. You ask the consumers if it's a consumer product. You ask your friend that works in industry X. So it's asking everyone that touches the thing in your business rollout plan is really important versus assuming it works from some stakeholder or forgetting a stakeholder, not kind of drawing out the little bubble chart to ask all of the questions. And that's hard because you can say your IP, but it's always I have no good metaphor or quote for, got to give information. Actually, here's one. You got to give information to get information. And so if you just hide your idea, you're not going to get feedback on your idea. And so you just got to believe in yourself and your execution and not go to the obvious wrong person to go ask who's competitive. But, maybe tier 3 of far removed could be fine. But you have to give to get. Make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I don't think any idea, well, some ideas need to be protected and whatnot, but I don't think any idea is too precious that you can't get someone's opinion about it, right? Sometimes you gotta, I don't know if that's what you're getting at all, but like you have to get, no matter how good your IP is, you still have to get feedback on it. Like you can't just live in your own head.
Yeah, and it could be high level, right? Like if say you've got some mathematical algorithm that does XYZ, don't walk someone through the algorithm,
Right.
but you can still tell them what the outputs are and what the goal is and how it works in the market. You could still have a discussion about it while protecting it. So finding that fine line and not being afraid and putting no line or just keeping quiet.
Read.
Good. I think we're at time. I hope this was a helpful episode for all of our viewers. And thank you, Johnny and Dan and Eva. I participated too. And till next time.
Sounds great.